June the 4th, 1999 may not be a significant date in world history, but it was a major turning point in my life. That was the day I created my first ever piece of 3D animation. 25 years on, I wanted to mark the occasion by creating a new animation, inspired by that very first attempt, whilst also sharing some of the key lessons I've learned during a quarter of a century of character animation. It all started when in June of 1999, I walked into a shop and, on a whim, bought these two magazines. This was less than 4 years since the release of Toy Story, so the thought of creating 3D animation on a home computer simply hadn't ever occurred to me. Since one of the magazines came with some free software, I decided to give it a try, and on one evening in June, I sat down and created my first ever piece of 3D animation, inspired by the cover of one of the magazines. Obviously, I use the term animation here in the loosest possible sense. Really, I made something in 3D that moves. But it was a start, and I was hooked. Up until that point, I'd never truly known what I wanted to do with my life. But these magazines exposed me to an exciting new world I was eager to explore. One piece of animation led to another, and before I knew it, I was a professional animator working in children's television. Jumping forward to the present day, I thought it'd be fun to remake that original animation, or rather to reimagine it in a way which made use of the many things that I've learnt over the years. Now, obviously wasps are not the friendliest of insects, so I very quickly decided that if I was going to do this, a honeybee would be a far more appealing subject. And with that simple thought as my starting point, I decided to jump into reference. Whenever I start any new project, one of the first things that I always do is look for reference. Finding or filming good reference can be time consuming, but it's well worth it. There's a common misconception that when making art or animation, using reference is cheating, that we should somehow create everything from our imagination alone. The reality is, every professional artist uses reference. The important thing is the way that you use it. Our goal should never be to copy the reference directly, but instead we should be inspired by it and take elements which add believability to an otherwise caricatured design or performance. Reference often reveals details which you never would have thought of had you relied upon memory or imagination alone. Over the years, I've made it a point to closely observe the world around me, looking for anything which can be brought into my animation. Sometimes this is simply people watching, but whenever possible, I also like to film things which might one day be useful. 4 years ago, I was watching bees flying around in my garden when I decided to film some slow motion footage of them. I had no particular project in mind, I simply thought it would be a good way of getting a closer look at how they moved. This footage turned out to be really useful for this project, and having it already captured meant that I didn't need to go out hunting for bees or trawling the internet for useful reference. One thing I found interesting to note here is that despite the footage being filmed at 120 frames per second, the bee's wings are still blurred in flight. That's because a bee flaps its wings at an amazing 230 beats per second. These are the sort of facts which only come about from researching your subject. I've always loved watching animation, and even thought of it as a career far earlier in my life. But seeing the work of Disney animators was simply too overwhelming, and I was ultimately put off because I thought I'd never be able to draw well enough. When I first started to animate in 3D, I saw it as a way of bringing characters to life without needing strong drawing skills. But the more that I've learned, the more highly I value those skills, and the more I try to improve them. You certainly don't need to be able to draw well to animate well, but even just a little bit of knowledge goes a long way with being able to visualize or communicate an idea to others. I'm still not at the level that I'd like to be with my 2D artwork, but over the years I've learned enough to now feel confident with designing characters of my own rather than simply animating characters created by other people. If there's one thing that I'd like to go back and tell my younger self, it's that learning to draw well is simply a matter of practice, and the sooner you start, the better. It's arguable that if I wanted this animation to be a reflection of how I've progressed over the past 25 years, I should create it in a similar amount of time as the original. But if there's one thing that I've learnt over the years, it's that creating anything worthwhile takes time. Animation is a slow process, which requires patience. Unfortunately, this is at odds with the reality that we live in a time when, for a variety of reasons, people are trying to create things at an ever faster pace. That's not to say that time constraints aren't helpful. In fact, without a deadline, it's highly unlikely that I'd complete any work at all. In a studio, you often have tight deadlines, and you may not be able to hit the quality that you'd like within the time available. When it comes to personal projects, I like to give myself the luxury of a little bit more time. Not so much that I don't get on with things, but just enough to be able to focus on creating a result that I'm happy with before moving on to something new. As an animator working in a studio, you'll typically only ever focus on creating the character performance. All of the myriad of other tasks related to bringing an animation to the screen will be worked on by a team of other artists. This degree of specialism is great for improving your skills in one area, but it restricts you to always working within a team. Personally, I've always wanted to design and bring my own characters to life, so this has meant also developing a range of skills across many disciplines. Over the years, one of the most important things that I've done is to continue being curious and striving to learn new things. I may not have an in-depth knowledge of everything, but I know enough to bring my own ideas into the world. For this project, I knew I'd need to make use of hair to get the soft feeling that I was after. Unfortunately, this is something I've never dived into with any great depth. I simply haven't worked on projects where I've needed to. But whenever I hit an obstacle like this, I simply see it as another opportunity to learn something new. This generalist skill set has also aided me whilst working in studios. Having a knowledge of rigging has helped me to troubleshoot issues more effectively, and as an animation director, being able to talk to artists in different departments with a level of understanding of what they do has often been invaluable. Many animators I know, once they get into a studio, give up on making personal projects. This is understandable. After a day of animating, it can be hard to return home and sit back in front of a computer. But I feel that personal projects such as this one can be extremely valuable throughout your career. Personal projects are great for opening doors. It wasn't applying to job postings which led to my first job in the industry, but instead a personal project of mine which I posted online caught the eye of someone at a studio that was looking for an animator. They can also be invaluable when it comes time to move studio. Often you are unable to show your most recent work until it's aired. There are no such restrictions with work you've created yourself though. Finally, personal projects are also a great place to exercise your own creativity, experiment and try new things. They allow you to push yourself in ways which it's often hard to when you're up against tight studio deadlines. If there's something which I feel will elevate any piece of animation, it's making sure that you're telling a clear story. I see too many pieces of animation where characters seem to move around with no particular motivation. In feature or TV animation, it may seem obvious that you're part of a team which is helping to tell a story. But at the level of the individual shot, it can be easy to forget this as you become focused on the technical aspects of what you're doing or get over-enthusiastic about specific elements you can add to make your shot stand out. Every decision you make as an animator should be in service of the overall story. Obviously, with a piece of animation like this, which is just a few seconds long, it may seem that storytelling doesn't matter. But simply understanding your character, what they want and what they're feeling within the moment, can add motivation to any move you make on screen and help to create a far more engaging performance. We no longer live in a time where you need to open a magazine in order to learn the basics of 3D animation. My goal with this channel and the Into Animation website is to do for others what those magazines did for me a quarter of a century ago. Open a door to the exciting and magical world of animation and share the knowledge and skills required for anyone to be able to create projects like this of their own. Once you've developed those skills, where you take your animation over the next 25 years is up to you.